So I was born in Prague, and then it was a very nice city. It was a free country, a democratic country. But my parents, of course, were well informed about the ascent of the Nazi Party in neighboring Germany, and they were very concerned, and they were trying to possibilities to emigrate, because I think in those days every Jew realized that Europe is a continent we can no longer make plans for the future. In wildest dreams or worst nightmares didn't occur to us that we are facing death. In 1938, the country was still unoccupied, and the Kristallnacht, as you know, happened in November 9, and it was the night of the broken glass. We have heard about, of course, we knew about the assassination of von Rath in Paris on Herschel Greenspan, by Herschel Greenspan. But again, we lived in such a civilized country, we didn't think that you can burn synagogues and throw people into rivers and bring them to concentration camp, because somewhere a teenager decided to commit a crime. But no luck. So the virtual occupation, or the virtual start of the disaster for me as a child then began when I remember when I woke up 15th of March 1939 to the sound of the radio, which was telling us that everybody should stay in because the German army is in process of occupying the country, but nobody should offer resistance, which would have been insanity, and to stay and wait for further instructions, which we did. But being as a not even teenager, I thought that must be something interesting. So I took we lived in a house which had elevators. So I took the elevator down and wanted to see what is the occupation. Because, you know, I'm telling that because I was totally fearless. Up until then, fear was not a part of my day-by-day life. So there I stood a while, and suddenly there was the roar of the motorized units coming down the boulevard. And I saw the tanks and the big lorries, and I thought, well, there's something I cannot cope with. So I made a beeline and went home. So now we were without means because my father lost his job. Nobody could employ a Jew. We had immediately a curfew. By sunset, every Jew must be at home and stay there till next day in the morning. We couldn't use streetcars, only the last car, and that between 4 and 5. And then, of course, we couldn't shop with other people. Also, only some stores that were willing to deal with Jews, and again between 4 and 5. So the 4 and 5 was kind of a magic hour, which we didn't know what to do first. And so by 1941, I remember that the rumors started to fill Prague that we will be deported. In May 1942, a knock came on our door, and we were informed that we are to present ourselves within 3 days at the site of deportation. Why? What did we do to whom that we are supposed to be expelled from the only home we ever had? And I remember that was like my parents, and he looked so sad and skinny already by then, because not that we were starving already, but close to it. So we trudged with these backpacks and back to this place, and there we were 3 days sitting on the floor. There was no food and drink provided, but we knew that, so we brought from home whatever we needed. And 3 days later, we were ordered on those trains which were waiting there for us. And though I said that shortly before we received that order, the friend of my father, who remained so loyal to us, came, and he said that in the place where he has his holdings, he had other holdings as well, there will be a transit camp open for Czech Jews on the first leg of their deportation to the east, and if he were to come there, he will take care of us. And the name of the place where the camp will be is Theresienstadt. That when we were on that train, squeezed as sardines, I remember everybody was praying in silence that it should stop in 2 hours, because we knew that there's a distance from Prague to this transit camp. If there will be continuation, there's a great likelihood that we will be ending up going straight to this east. And though it didn't have a name, with every passing day there were more and more rumors which were more and more frightening, that this east equals death. So we were ordered off the train, carried our luggages and marched to the triage place, which was really the stable of the garrison. So eventually we were ordered to sit on the floor and wait for further instructions. And meanwhile, we have succeeded somehow to contact the friend of my father that we are where we are. And I think 2 hours into our sitting there on the ground, they were announced that we were 3 days later we will be leaving for the east. And that was a terrible shock. So as people were put on the next train, suddenly our names, name of my parents, sister and I, were called out and we were exempted. So that friend of my father did what he promised, to a grave risk to him, because to have anything to do with Jews was lethal, let alone when already in concentration camp. So my father went to the Sudeten barracks, which were for men. They all were sitting on the floor. There were no mattresses, no nothing. And women, my mother, sister, and I, we went to women barracks, which had 3-tier bunks. And these were assigned, every hall was administered by one assigned woman, and she assigned to you the bunk. Of course, the bunks were supposed to sleep 6, but any time there were multiply of it, because people were coming and the Germans were bringing transport after transport, and eventually transport were also leaving, because it was a transit camp. We didn't see my father for several weeks, because the men's barracks were closed. But after several weeks into our stay in Theresienstadt, the Germans have ordered all Gentiles out. And they made out of the entire town became a concentration camp. So their barracks now, where the men lived and women lived, no longer were so guarded, and even the little homes which the thatched roofs, the inmates were put in. So that changed the picture of Theresienstadt, because the entire expanse was now a camp. And the camp was guarded by SS, who were armed to their teeth, and assisted by Czech gendarmes, 150 men strong, who did not have firearms. Initially, the friend of my father arranged that I have met him in these underground passages, where he came and brought me some food, because he knew one thing: we were badly starving. That was the horrible part of every life in camp. And I would grab the package and run out, because it was all underground. The life of an inmate, if you didn't have any extra help, was short-lived. Initially, when we came, I think the amount of food we got were 300 calories a day, which was all liquefied, and you could live on it. But in the first few months, we had this help of my sister and then that guy, friend of my father. But eventually, he vanished, the man. My sister came down with some infection, and because there were no medication. And so I think 6 months into our stay there, she passed away. And she was 17. And that was, of course, an unimaginable blow to my parents, who looked at their firstborn going downhill. They couldn't do a thing to help. So it was a very desperate time. So my parents have died, and I think by 1944, I was there all alone, because by that time everybody was dead, and it was an ongoing battle from day to day, who will leave and who will stay. And I think most of people, I think over 90% of all Czech Jews were deported and died. In Theresienstadt, per se, was high mortality too. I mean, in those 3 years of its existence, I think nearly 40,000 people perished. Natural, so to speak, subhuman living conditions, death. Actually, in fall of 1944, majority of Theresienstadt people were deported, and we were just a very small number there. The idea was to disassemble the camp. But again, the vagaries of war have changed, and the Russians were pushing from east towards west, and the Germans have decided that to force some inmates from different camps onto this road. That's the death marches, and they marched them into Theresienstadt, which was the innermost camp which they still had a control over. And so by 1944, towards I think March or April, started to stagger in people who didn't even look anymore like people. Not that we looked that great, but you see, if you lose so much weight, we all looked alike. You may not believe it, but it's got the yellowish skin covers the bones, and you lose your individuality. that was our fate much too. But these people who staggered in, covered in lice and torn in rags, they no longer looked like if they would have any resemblance to a human being. Theresienstadt in the spring of 1945, when the end of the war approaching, unbeknownst to us, looked like a huge mortuary, corpses all over. You know, we no longer had a strength to carry or transport the bodies to the crematories, which the Germans long ago built there because the mortality was so high. So it was piling up, the stench covering the place, and it looked like I think even hell must be a more hospitable place than that. And I remember it was May 8th when there was some kind of noise in the camp, and I was also very much run down. But some of us still walked, most of us crawled, and some people crawled to the direction of those thick walls. So that was unusual because that was forbidden. And the guards were instructed that if any inmates approached the wall, shoot to kill. So now people were coming closer to these thick walls and nothing happened. So we were absolutely, those of us who could still think, what is there for a change? And when we got near the walls, I think somebody who realized that the Germans obviously are not in charge anymore, removed some stones from these thick walls, and people crawled through it into the main highway, which passed by Theresienstadt. So eventually I followed suit, and it was a beautiful sunny day, but by that time, you know, the sun and the beauty no longer registered with us because we are so weakened and so in such desolate state. I don't know if you can imagine that the very basic hygiene in camp, no one able to change any clothing. We didn't see a toothbrush for years. You know, all these things were matter of memory of days by God. So, you know, I think I remember we stood there and from the distance was coming some kind of a sound which was obviously the motorized units. These were tank units. And on the turrets were the sickle and hammer, and that was the insignia of the seasoned Soviet Union. And at that moment, we knew that we have lived to see the miracle, that we have seen the end of the Germans, and that the evil has been defeated. And I cannot find words to put the feelings into that. As we realize what has happened, the bodies, after medical care and proper nutrition and clothing, we started to recover. And then came the much even worse part, because then you had to come to terms with what had happened. And then I had realized that all 50 members of my family have died. So then you started to go, what do I do now? So in my situation, first I was looking for my 50 relatives. And the Red Cross and the Jewish community, they were very helpful. They tried to pieced me where they ended, and I have detailed evidence, which is one row of pain and tears where they ended, and I also knew where they were executed and killed, but nobody came back. And I think in those days, the Czechs before the war were, I don't want to say latently anti-Semitic, but not really nowhere to compare to the violence of the Polish or Ukrainian anti-Semitism. But after the war, 1945, I remember there was a very cold reception, particularly by those who had a few items for safekeeping from what my parents left with their Gentile friends for safekeeping. They didn't want their Jew to come back. They didn't mind if some Jew comes back, but their Jew should have died. My husband had a sister and a mother. They lived in Toronto, and Canada has got a family reunification program with which we qualified. The Canadian government were generous enough to grant us the entry. So in 1961 we came here and started anew. Then it was, of course, very difficult to re-establish our credentials and professionals. It was a very arduous road, but I mean, it was safety here in Canada. So that, you know, I'm always grateful to Canadian government for having afforded us a new lease on life. And I'm trying to contribute to talking to young people in different places to warn them that freedom is not a gift for free, that people cannot believe that if they have in Canada today a good life, that this is forever. Because we did believe so once too. And if somebody would have told me in those years in the democratic Czechoslovakia that this will all fall to dust and shards, I would have never believed it. So I think people should do the right thing and should know to stand against evil or violence or against bullying and be brave, not to take for granted that we have it so good here, which we do.